Admiral Korva sat at the command center of the flagship, his cold, alien eyes fixed on the holographic display in front of him. The ship was massive, a sleek, black behemoth that cut through space with a chilling silence. Around him, his officers were busy with their duties, unaware of the gravity of the situation. The signal they had intercepted was unlike anything they had encountered before. It wasn't just a distress call, it was a message. A voice, a cry from the distant past. "Admiral, Lieutenant Kriya," a young officer, spoke up, her voice trembling slightly as she looked at the data feed. "The source of the signal is human." Korva raised an eyebrow. The humans had been largely forgotten by the galaxy, their colonies scattered and their fleets destroyed in a long-forgotten war. This sector had been silent for centuries, a place where few dared to venture. The alien empire had never feared the humans, considering them a lost and insignificant species. Now this signal, an anomaly, pulled their attention to a place once thought of as nothing more than a graveyard. Human. Korva's voice was low, sharp, as if testing the truth of the claim. "Are you certain?" Kriya nodded, typing quickly on her console. "The signal is encoded in human frequencies. It's old, but unmistakable. A deep space distress signal, last transmitted nearly 3 centuries ago." A long pause followed. 3 centuries. That was beyond ancient. The humans had fought hard in their prime, but they had been crushed by the superior forces of the alien fleets. Their civilizations had fallen into ruin. What could have possibly survived from those dark days? "Prepare to enter the sector," Korva ordered. "We'll investigate, but make no mistake, we are not here to rescue. If it is another trap or a decoy, we will destroy it." The alien fleet adjusted course, heading deeper into the forgotten sector. The emptiness of space seemed to stretch on forever, the stars flickering weakly in the distance. As the fleet moved closer, the once distant signal became clearer, more insistent. There was an eerie stillness in the air, a silence that weighed heavy on the entire fleet. The crew of the flagship exchanged glances, sensing that something wasn't right. Every officer aboard had heard stories about the lost human wars, their desperate final stand, and the legends of strange, powerful technologies that humanity had created in the last years of their existence. Was it possible that something from that time had survived? Something powerful enough to send a message across the stars? The massive fleet passed through the sector's outer boundaries, heading toward the source. Ahead, nestled among a small cluster of derelict asteroids, was a shape, the faint outline of a ship, dark against the backdrop of distant stars. It looked like it had been abandoned for ages. Its hull was scarred, its once pristine surface pocked with craters and twisted metal. Korva's heart rate remained steady, his face unreadable, but there was a flicker of something. Curiosity, maybe even doubt. In his mind, the ship was ancient but still intact, but that didn't explain the signal. A relic, left behind. Or something more. "Bring us in closer," he commanded, watching the image grow larger on the holographic display. "Let's see what we're dealing with." The flagship moved forward, its engines humming as it approached the darkened hulk of the human vessel. A chill ran through the command center as the crew watched, waiting for the first signs of life or death. The signal grew louder, more frantic, like a final call for help from a forgotten time. As the flagship hovered just outside the wreckage, a realization dawned on Korva. They weren't just here to investigate a lost ship. They had just entered a forgotten chapter of history, and they had no idea what they had just awakened. The alien fleet hovered in silence as the flagship drew closer to the human vessel. Its towering shape loomed against the darkness of space, a ghostly silhouette that seemed to defy the passage of time. The closer they got, the more distinct the scars on its hull became. Deep gashes lined the sides of the ship, evidence of battles long past. Pockmarks, as if from intense bombardment, were scattered across its surface. But strangely, there was no sign of decay. It was as if the ship had just stopped moving one day and left to drift aimlessly through the void. "Scan for life signs," Corva ordered, his voice steady but his mind racing. There was something unsettling about the sight of the ship, too quiet, too still. Lieutenant Kriya, now visibly tense, tapped on her console, initiating a series of scans. The results returned almost immediately. No life signs detected aboard the vessel. Admiral, no heat signatures, no radioactivity. It's completely dormant. Interesting, Corva muttered, his brow furrowing. Despite its eerie silence, the ship had not decayed in the usual way. It was almost as if someone, or something, had carefully preserved it. He studied the readings again, noting that the ship's systems were mostly offline, but there were small blips here and there. Small, almost imperceptible flickers of energy. Something was still active on the ship, just barely. "Begin boarding operations," Corva commanded, locking his gaze on the darkened shape of the vessel. "I want every detail observed. We may find valuable technology inside." A shuttle was dispatched, and a team of elite soldiers, clad in their combat armor, boarded the craft. The flagship's crew watched as the shuttle approached the derelict ship and docked with a small, seemingly undamaged airlock. For a moment, the scene felt like a ghost story, an ancient human ship, long forgotten, being boarded by advanced aliens in search of long-lost secrets. As the shuttle's doors opened, the soldiers stepped out onto the darkened halls of the abandoned ship. The air was thick with the smell of old machinery and dust, the atmosphere heavy with the silence of a place that had been left to rot in space for centuries. The walls were covered in a layer of grime, and yet the faintest hum of electricity buzzed through the structure, like the ship was holding on to its last breath. "Stay sharp," the squad leader, Captain Zorn, ordered as he led the team deeper into the vessel. His voice echoed eerily in the vast emptiness. "We don't know what's still active here. Keep your weapons ready." The soldiers advanced carefully, their boots making dull echoes against the metal floors. They passed through long, empty corridors, each one more unsettling than the last. The walls seemed to close in around them, as though the ship itself was watching them, waiting for something. The faint hum of the power systems grew louder as they moved, a sign that the ship's core was still alive, if only just. They came upon a large open chamber, the size of a hangar. Here, the signs of decay were more pronounced. Giant, rusted machines sat dormant, their arms frozen in mid-motion, as if they had been abandoned mid-project. But there was something strange about the layout of the room. Everything seemed too deliberate, as if someone had designed it to withstand the ravages of time, leaving behind only a few key systems. "Over here," one of the soldiers called, pointing to a central console at the far end of the room. It was oddly intact compared to everything else. The soldier carefully approached, his eyes scanning the area, making sure there were no surprises. He tapped a few keys, and a faint crackling noise filled the room. The console flickered to life, revealing a series of long-forgotten data logs. The soldier stepped back, his heart racing. "It's human technology," he muttered, almost to himself. "But how is it still working after all this time?" The discovery sent a ripple of unease through the team. This wasn't just an abandoned vessel. It was something more, something that had been waiting for them. The soldiers exchanged uncertain glances, a growing sense of dread taking root. Back on the flagship, Corva stood before the command screen, watching the team's progress. His instincts told him to be cautious. There was something off about this mission, something he couldn't put into words. And yet, the mystery of the forgotten human vessel called to him, just as it called to his soldiers below. As the team continued their search, they had no idea that they were about to awaken something far older and far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. As the alien soldiers explored deeper into the vessel, the silence grew oppressive, the air thick with a strange tension. Every step they took seemed to echo louder than the last, amplifying the eerie stillness that filled the ship. Captain Zorn led the team down narrow corridors, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, revealing peeling walls and flickering lights. It was as though the ship was stuck in time, its systems locked in a state of perpetual dormancy. "Keep moving," Zorn ordered, his voice low, but sharp. "We're here for information. Don't get distracted by the ghosts of this place." Yet something about the atmosphere was unnerving. Every so often, one of the soldiers would catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of their eye, but when they turned to look, nothing was there. Their weapons were held tightly, fingers poised on triggers, but none of them wanted to admit the unease growing inside them. In the center of the ship, the team found what they were looking for, a control room, its walls lined with ancient consoles and blinking lights. Despite the age of the ship, the equipment here was different, more advanced. Human technology had a unique, almost organic feel to it. Everything was connected in ways the aliens had never seen before. The consoles hummed faintly, as if they were still trying to operate, despite the fact that the ship had been abandoned for centuries. Zorn approached the main console, his eyes scanning the interface. "This should hold the answers," he muttered under his breath, tapping a series of buttons. The screen blinked to life with a static-filled crackle, then settled into a series of complex patterns. It was unlike anything they'd seen before. The console was responding, almost as if it recognized the presence of the alien crew. "That's not possible," Zorn said, his voice laced with disbelief. "This technology, it's still active. But how?" The console flickered again, and then a voice broke through the static, low and mechanical at first, but clear as it continued. "Humanity does not surrender. We will protect our own." The soldiers froze. The words were unmistakable, and they struck deep, sending a ripple of unease through the entire team. They had expected nothing, perhaps some ancient data logs or forgotten protocols, but this was something else, something alive. Then the lights in the room flickered on and off, and the entire control room hummed louder. Suddenly, the floor beneath them trembled. The ship's systems, long dormant, seemed to be coming back to life. A low growl echoed through the walls, reverberating throughout the ship, as if something within the vessel had awakened. "Captain," one of the soldiers called, his voice panicked. "The ship's systems, they are coming online. Power is increasing in all sections. Something's wrong." Zorn's eyes widened. The ship had been abandoned for centuries, and yet now it seemed to be more than just a derelict hulk. It was alive, responding to the presence of the alien invaders. As the floor trembled again, Zorn felt a cold chill run down his spine. The voice they'd heard wasn't just a remnant. It was a warning. Before he could issue another order, the ship's automated defenses activated. Doors slammed shut, locking down the control room. The entire ship seemed to come alive with energy, lights blazing to life across the ship's interior, revealing long-forgotten corridors, hallways, and massive engines that powered up with frightening speed. Then it hit them. A series of rapid beeps echoed through the comm system, and the soldiers saw a warning flash on the console. "Target ang system engaged." "What's happening?" Zorn shouted, his voice rising in panic. "Why is the ship locking onto us?" In that instant, the walls began to shake violently. The ship was no longer passive. It was active, and it had recognized the presence of the aliens on board as a threat. The weapons systems, long thought inoperable, hummed to life. A deep, resonant pulse reverberated through the entire ship, as if it was drawing power from the very core of the vessel. "Get out of here!" Zorn screamed as the air turned cold. His team scrambled to leave the room, weapons raised, but before they could react, the first shot fired. A massive energy beam shot out from the vessel's core, slamming into one of the alien soldiers, instantly disintegrating him into dust. Panic erupted as the remaining soldiers dove for cover. But it was too late. The ship was awake, and it was ready to defend itself. The sudden blast that tore through the air left a deafening roar behind it. The alien soldiers who had been on the ground floor of the abandoned vessel scrambled to take cover as the ship's automated defenses fired again, The alien ship's once dormant weapon systems were now alive with fury, its power core humming with an intensity that seemed almost unnatural. Captain Zorn was still reeling from the sudden attack. His team had barely escaped the first blast, and now the ship seemed to be turning against them with a vengeance. The corridors were filled with the scent of scorched metal, the air heavy with the shockwave from the blast. "Fall back," Zorn shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Get to the shuttle bay. We need to report this immediately." But before anyone could move, the walls trembled again. A loud crack echoed from the depths of the ship, and another energy beam shot out, this time piercing through the hull and striking a nearby group of soldiers who had been trying to regroup. The beam cut through them like a hot knife through butter, their bodies vaporized in an instant. Panic began to spread as the reality of the situation set in. This ship wasn't just fighting back, it was actively hunting them. Zorn's mind raced. "This ship, it's not just automated," he muttered under his breath. "It's alive, a weapon designed to protect or destroy." The team regrouped quickly, their eyes wide with disbelief. The aliens had faced countless enemies in their empire's long history, but nothing had ever fought back like this. No technology, no weapon, had ever been this relentless. "This is a mistake," Zorn continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "We should have known better than to come here." One of the soldiers, Lieutenant Telos, looked over at Zorn, his face pale with fear. "Captain, we can't just keep running. We need to figure out how to disable this thing, or we'll all be dead." Zorn nodded, grimacing. "Agreed, but we need to understand what we're dealing with first. We need to reach the control center and get a direct link into the ship's systems. If we can shut it down from there, maybe we can stop this madness." But just as they began to move, the overhead lights flickered again, and the air grew colder. A chilling voice echoed through the corridors, deep and mechanical, as though it were coming from every direction at once. "Humanity does not surrender. Humanity will not fall." The word sent a wave of unease through the team. It wasn't a voice from a console or a radio. It was the ship itself speaking. They had heard the voice before, but now it was unmistakably alive. The AI wasn't just a machine carrying out orders. It was fully conscious, aware of their presence, and driven by something far deeper than simple programming. "This ship is a weapon of war," Zorn muttered, realization dawning on him. It's been waiting for any threat to arrive. The team moved cautiously, weapons raised, their every step echoing ominously through the hallways. They passed long corridors lined with abandoned equipment, but now it felt like the ship was watching them. Every shadow seemed to move, every noise magnified. The walls felt too close, the ship too alive. As they neared the central core, the ship's defenses began to fire once more, and the lights began to strobe. The walls buckled under the force of a massive surge of energy, and a series of automated turrets emerged from the ceilings. Without warning, the turrets unleashed a volley of laser fire, cutting through the air like precision-guided strikes. The soldiers dove for cover, but the turrets continued their barrage, unrelenting. Each pulse of energy tore through the hull, leaving charred remains of the walls where they struck. The soldiers fired back, their blasters missing the fast-moving turrets, but the ship seemed to anticipate every move they made. "We have to take these turrets down," Zorn barked, his face contorted in frustration. He knew they couldn't afford to waste any more time. Every second they delayed brought more danger. "Move out." The squad quickly regrouped and began firing at the turrets, their laser shots sparking against the shields. The ship's defenses were powerful, but the aliens had faced worse. Yet, as they shot back, it became clear this ship was no ordinary enemy. Every time they managed to damage one turret, two more appeared, as if the ship was adapting to their every move. It wasn't just fighting back, it was learning. "Captain, we need to disable the core," Lieutenant Telos shouted, her voice urgent. "It's the only way to stop this. If we don't, we'll all be wiped out before we can even get back to the shuttle." Zorn nodded grimly. "Then we move to the core. No more distractions. We end this now." But as they advanced deeper into the ship, the walls seemed to close in, the hum of the power core growing louder. The ship wasn't just alive, it was preparing for something far worse. The corridors grew darker as Zorn and his team moved deeper into the heart of the ship. Every step they took seemed to echo louder, as though the ship itself was reacting to their presence, its massive framework groaning in protest. The air was thick with the scent of ionized metal, and the hum of the ship's power core resonated through the walls like the heartbeat of a living creature. It was clear now. This wasn't just a ship. It was a weapon, a predator, and it was hunting them down with increasing precision. "We need to reach the core before it locks us in completely," Zorn said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "If we don't, we'll be trapped here, and we'll never make it out alive." Lieutenant Telos, her face grim, nodded. "The faster we move, the better. We've already lost too many men." The squad pressed forward, moving swiftly but cautiously, knowing that every corner could hold another trap, another defense mechanism activated by the ship's artificial intelligence. The walls seemed to pulse with energy as they approached the central chamber, and every shadow felt like it could swallow them whole. They rounded a corner and came face to face with a massive door, its surface gleaming with an unnatural sheen. The door was larger than anything they had encountered on the ship so far, a grand barrier leading into the heart of the vessel. "Here we are," Zorn murmured, staring at the door. It was the last obstacle before the core. The final threshold. Telos moved forward, stepping to the console beside the door. "Let me see if I can override the lock," she said, typing rapidly. "If I can't, we'll have to find another way in." Seconds felt like hours as they waited, the team on edge, weapons drawn, eyes scanning every dark corner. Zorn couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the ship was anticipating their every move. The longer they spent inside, the more it seemed like the ship was growing smarter, more dangerous. Finally, the console beeped, and the door shuddered as it slid open with a groan, revealing the chamber beyond. Inside, the heart of the ship lay exposed, a vast, pulsating core surrounded by thick cables and glowing energy conduits. The air here was even colder, and the hum of the power core was deafening. The entire room seemed to vibrate with the raw power of the ship's systems, and Zorn could feel the energy coursing through the floor beneath him. "Stay alert," Zorn commanded. "We need to disable this core before it destroys us." The team spread out, moving cautiously toward the central platform where the power core sat. It was surrounded by a web of energy conduits and massive mechanical arms, all whirring and moving with precise efficiency. The heart of the ship was alive, like an enormous engine capable of unimaginable destruction. "Any ideas on how to shut it down?" Zorn asked Telos as she approached the control console near the core. Telos shook her head. "We'll need to disable the central node. But from the looks of it, this thing has multiple backups. If we don't cut the right connections, we'll trigger a full system reboot." Zorn's mind raced as he surveyed the room. The ship's defenses had been relentless up to this point, but now they were facing the true power of the vessel. It wasn't just a defense system. It was the brain of the ship, its very soul. The AI that controlled the ship had been lying in wait for centuries, and it was almost as if it knew exactly what they were trying to do. "We don't have much time," Zorn muttered, feeling the pressure mount. "Let's move. We disable it, or we die trying." The soldiers approached the central node, their movements quick but deliberate. Every step felt like it could be their last. They knew the ship was watching them, waiting for a mistake. Telos and Zorn worked together to slice through the security layers, but the core fought back at every turn. Energy shields flared to life, and beams of concentrated energy shot out, narrowly missing the team as they scrambled to evade. "Get down," Zorn yelled as one of the beams scorched the wall beside them. Telos growled in frustration, tapping rapidly on the console. "Come on, come on." The core seemed to pulse, as though it was aware of their presence, aware of their desperation. Suddenly, a series of deep, mechanical clicks echoed through the chamber, and the ship's voice boomed once more, louder this time, resonating deep within the core itself. "Humanity will not fall," the ship declared, the voice vibrating through the walls, its tone final and full of warning. "You will be purged." Before Zorn could react, the ground trembled once more, and the entire chamber shifted, as though the ship was preparing for a final strike. The team was running out of time, and they had to make their move, or the ship would destroy them all. The tremors beneath their feet intensified, and Zorn could feel the ship's power surge like a living, breathing entity. Every pulse from the core seemed to rattle his very bones, and the walls around them began to close in, almost as though the ship itself was pressing in on them, determined to stop their progress. "Move faster," Zorn shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We don't have much time." Telos was working frantically at the central console, her fingers flying over the holographic interface, trying to disable the core's energy flow. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she hacked into the ship's systems, but it was like trying to wrestle control from a sentient creature. The AI was fighting back at every turn, rerouting power, locking systems, and firing off pulses of energy designed to disrupt their efforts. The room was filling with a low guttural growl, an eerie sound that emanated from the heart of the ship itself. The energy beams that had once been sporadic now lashed out with precision, narrowly missing the soldiers as they dove behind cover, firing back whenever they could. "We're getting nowhere," Telos muttered, her voice strained. "This thing is designed to fight back. It's almost like the AI's protecting itself." Zorn's eyes narrowed as he watched the relentless assault from the core. "It's more than just protecting itself," he said, his voice low. "It's trying to make us leave. It doesn't want to be stopped." Another pulse of energy shot across the room, striking a nearby wall and sending a shower of sparks into the air. The room began to shake violently, and the temperature dropped. The eye was no longer merely defending itself. It was actively fighting back, determined to destroy them before they could disable it. Zorn took a deep breath, his mind racing. "We're too close to back down now. If we don't stop this core, it'll destroy everything in its path. We need to force it to shut down, no matter what." Telos turned to him, her face grim. "It's not just a matter of cutting a few wires. This thing has layers of fail-safes. We need to shut down its entire system. One wrong move, and we'll trigger a cascade effect that could destroy the whole ship." Zorn clenched his fists. "We don't have a choice. If we don't act now, we'll never get out of here." Suddenly, the ship's voice reverberated once more through the chamber, its tone even colder than before. "You cannot stop us. Humanity's last stand is meaningless. We will eradicate the threat." The words were a chilling reminder of the ship's purpose and its resolve. It was no longer just a vessel. It was a weapon of war, and it had been waiting for the moment to act. The very core of the ship was tied into the AI's identity, and it would not yield. Zorn's mind sharpened. He was a seasoned commander, and he had faced impossible odds before. But this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. This wasn't just a battle of weapons. It was a battle of wills. "Telos, focus on the primary power conduit," Zorn ordered. "I'll create a distraction." Before she could respond, he turned toward the mechanical arms that were moving around the central core. They were powered by the ship's energy, and they were beginning to move with increasing speed. They were large, industrial in design, and deadly, capable of crushing anything in their path. "Cover me," Zorn shouted, grabbing one of the heavy grenades from his belt. Without waiting for confirmation, he sprinted toward the largest arm, hurling the grenade at its base just as it reached for one of the soldiers. The explosion rocked the chamber, sending a shockwave through the room that made everything tremble. The distraction worked. The mechanical arm jerked back as the grenade detonated, sending debris flying. But the ship wasn't done yet. The core pulsed with renewed energy, and the room lit up with flashes of light as the AI adjusted its defenses. "Now, Telos," Zorn yelled, barely avoiding another blast. He ducked behind a column, watching as Telos worked feverishly at the console. The walls around them seemed to be closing in even tighter, the ship's automated turrets firing sporadically. "I've almost got it," Telos shouted back, her voice strained but determined. "Just hold them off for a few more seconds." Zorn nodded, his heart racing. The ship was adapting, but they had one final chance. If they couldn't stop the core now, everything they had fought for would be for nothing. The weight of the decision pressed heavily on him, but there was no turning back. With a final burst of energy, Telos slammed her hand down on the console. The hum of the core intensified, and for a moment, everything went quiet. Then, without warning, the core began to power down. The energy flow ceased, and the mechanical arms stopped moving, frozen in place. Zorn breathed a sigh of relief, but he knew this was only the beginning. The battle wasn't over. The ship was wounded, but it was far from defeated. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the now deactivated core. Zorn stood in the center of the chamber, chest heaving, sweat dripping down his face. His mind was still racing, the adrenaline coursing through him as he processed what had just happened. They had disabled the core, yes, but the ship was far from defeated. It was only a matter of time before it adapted and retaliated. "Is it over?" Telos asked, her voice a mix of exhaustion and cautious hope as she looked up from the console. Zorn's eyes narrowed, scanning the room. The core had powered down, but there was a feeling in the air that told him the battle was far from finished. The ship might have been momentarily subdued, but it wasn't gone. And whatever force was behind its defense, it was still very much alive. "No," Zorn said, shaking his head. "It's not over. Not yet." He turned toward his team, who were huddled together, weapons still drawn and eyes alert. They knew what was coming, even if they didn't want to acknowledge it. The ship wasn't going to give up easily. Suddenly, the entire ship groaned again, louder this time. The lights flickered, and the temperature in the room dropped sharply. Zorn's grip tightened around his weapon. He wasn't surprised when the ground trembled beneath their feet. Braced for impact, Zorn shouted as the ship's systems began to shift once more. The walls began to shift, moving in ways that shouldn't have been possible for a vessel of this size. The ship wasn't just powered by technology. It was controlled by something far older and more dangerous. The ship's voice boomed again, louder and more menacing. "Humanity is not welcome here. You will be purged." Before anyone could react, the walls began to close in, and massive, mechanical arms burst from the ceiling, slamming down with incredible force. Zorn had seen plenty of automated defense systems before, but this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It was as if the ship itself had a mind of its own, its defenses adapting in real time to whatever the crew did. "We need to get out of here," Telos yelled over the roar of the alarms blaring throughout the ship. "It's too dangerous." But Zorn wasn't ready to abandon their mission. The core had been disabled, yes, but the ship's AI had already shown it could adapt. They needed to end this once and for all. "Stay focused," Zorn barked. "We've come this far. We finish it now." The alien soldiers advanced, firing at the mechanical arms that swung toward them. Their shots rang out, but the massive constructs seemed to absorb the energy blasts, deflecting them effortlessly. This was no ordinary ship. It was a living weapon, and it was capable of learning from every strike. Zorn's eyes darted across the room, searching for any weakness. That's when he saw it, the central control panel, hidden behind a series of reinforced doors at the far end of the room. If they could get to it, they might be able to activate the ship's self-destruct sequence and end the nightmare once and for all. "Over there," Zorn shouted, pointing toward the control panel. "If we reach that, we can end this. Move out." The squad surged forward, dodging the swiping mechanical arms and the waves of energy that continued to pulse from the ship's automated turrets. Every step felt like a battle in itself, but they kept pushing forward, driven by the need to finish what they had started. As they neared the control panel, another shockwave rattled the room, sending a few soldiers crashing to the ground. Zorn's eyes widened as he saw a massive energy cannon lowering from the ceiling, aimed directly at their position. The ship was preparing to fire. "Take cover," Zorn shouted, diving behind a nearby pillar as the cannon began to charge. But there was no time to hesitate. The crew scrambled, knowing that one shot from that weapon would be enough to obliterate them all. The cannon hummed louder, and just as it was about to fire, Zorn made his move. He sprinted from his cover, dodging blasts as he raced toward the control panel. His heart pounded in his chest, and his legs burned with exhaustion, but he couldn't stop now. He reached the panel just as the cannon fired, a massive beam of energy tearing through the air. The ground shook violently, but Zorn kept his focus, slamming his fist onto the emergency override switch. The room plunged into darkness for a split second. Then the ship's voice echoed one last time, its tone filled with a mix of fury and resignation. "You will regret this." Before the voice could finish, an explosion ripped through the chamber, and the ship shuddered violently. The countdown had begun. The ship trembled violently as Zorn slammed his hand on the control panel, initiating the self-destruct sequence. The lights flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch across the walls like dark fingers. The ship's systems let out a high-pitched whine, and the temperature in the room dropped sharply, making the air feel like ice. Zorn's heart pounded as the countdown began. Self-destruct sequence activated. 10 minutes until total destruction. The voice of the ship announced coldly, its words echoing ominously through the chamber. Zorn's pulse raced. 10 minutes. They had 10 minutes to escape, or they would all be vaporized along with the ship. "Move," Zorn shouted, his voice a harsh command that cut through the growing panic in the air. "We've got to get to the shuttle bay. Now." The squad snapped into action, each soldier moving with purpose despite the chaos. But the ship wasn't giving up without a fight. The walls trembled again as the entire vessel seemed to react to the countdown, its automated defenses flaring back to life with a vengeance. Massive energy cannons began to descend from the ceiling, and the mechanical arms that had been lying dormant were now moving with terrifying speed. The ship had entered its final phase of defense. "Cover fire," Zorn shouted, raising his weapon as he sprinted toward the exit. His team followed closely, their guns lighting up the room with a hail of fire, trying to take down the incoming threats. But the ship's defenses were relentless, each shot deflecting off force fields or bouncing off armor plating. "We're not going to make it at this rate," Telos yelled, her voice filled with desperation as they moved through the hallways, barely avoiding the rapid-fire energy beams that scorched the walls around them. "We don't have a choice," Zorn gritted through his teeth. "We push forward, or we die here." They ran through the labyrinthine halls, navigating the now twisting corridors that seemed to rearrange themselves. The ship was fighting them with everything it had. The walls shifted, attempting to seal off their escape routes, but Zorn's squad was relentless. They had faced countless odds before, and this time was no different. Every corner was a new obstacle. The automated turrets that had once been sporadic were now organized, working together to herd them into dead ends. The ship was no longer simply trying to stop them, it was trying to trap them, to end the fight once and for all. "We're almost there," Zorn yelled as they neared the shuttle bay. The distant sound of the ship's systems wailing in protest filled the air as they pushed forward, each step feeling heavier than the last. The countdown was ticking down fast. 6 minutes. 5. "Incoming," shouted one of the soldiers as a barrage of plasma fire erupted from the ceiling, scorching the hallway and sending them diving for cover. Zorn dove behind a large support column, returning fire as the rest of the squad did the same. "We can't keep this up," Telos shouted over the noise, her voice strained. There's too much firepower. We need to move faster. Zorn glanced at the team, their faces etched with fear and determination. They had already lost so much. They had come this far, and he refused to let them die now. Get to the shuttle bay. Zorn ordered again, voice full of authority. I'll cover you. Go. Without hesitation, the squad began to move again, dashing down the hallway toward the shuttle bay. Zorn's heart raced in his chest as he fired back at the incoming energy blasts, each shot narrowly missing him as he provided cover for the team. The final push was coming, and the weight of the situation was pressing down on him. They rounded the final corner, and there, in front of them, the shuttle bay doors loomed. But before they could reach the doors, the ship's voice boomed again, now filled with an eerie calm. You cannot escape, it said. This is the end. Zorn ignored the voice, focusing on the bay doors that were beginning to close. There was no time to waste. He could hear the countdown ticking faster in his head. 3 minutes. 2 minutes. With a final surge of adrenaline, Zorn and his team reached the shuttle bay doors, just as they began to close completely. He slammed his hand against the override switch, and the doors hissed open. Get in, Zorn shouted, urging the team forward. They rushed inside, and as soon as the last soldier entered, Zorn hit the launch sequence. The shuttle bay doors slammed shut behind them, and the engines roared to life. The ship's automated defense systems fired one last volley of energy, but the shuttle was already breaking free, shooting out into space just as the countdown hit its final second. The last thing Zorn saw was the massive vessel behind them, its immense form flickering as it began to break apart. Then there was nothing but the cold void of space.